Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice. Obviously, we have another jam-packed show for you today, keeping you updated on everything happening in the world of basketball. Obviously, we're going to continue to give you updates on the coronavirus situation in terms of the NBA and how it's affecting the NBA, returning, and all the dates and things that they're trying to do and have set up for the coming season. Obviously, we're going to talk about some of the things that have been implemented. They have a new transaction window now, so we know when players can sign with teams. We also are going to talk about some of the best free agents potentially out there for players to sign with. Obviously, we're going to talk about other protocol the NBA's put in place. We're going to talk about players having concerns with leaving the bubble. Also, owners speaking out, players getting healthy, players talking about going back to the racial injustice, being threatened by police and being worried about being stopped by police and all of that. And we're going to talk about just everything, like I said, determining what's going into this season returning and everything, because this is a forever evolving situation that will continue to evolve over time because of what's going on in today's world. And so obviously there's always something new every hour, it feels like, about what's going on, maybe a new something. Even if it's something small, it's still something. And I think that's something that I have to bring to you guys and help you guys get that information, so then you're not behind when the season comes back behind, oh, when did they make this deal, when did they make this signing, when did they decide to do this, and, just keep you guys updated for the most part. But we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with a report that Adam Silver, commissioner of the NBA, is confident in the NBA's restart despite Florida's COVID-19 spike. As you know, Florida right now is somewhat becoming the new epicenter for COVID-19, as there's been a huge spike and a huge raise in cases since they started to reopen things, beaches and everything like that. So obviously some people are concerned. The NBA is hosting their bubble down there. Is it safe to have a bubble in a place where a lot of COVID cases are now starting to spike at? And so obviously this is being very much feared by a lot of people. And so Adam Silver still coming out and saying, I'm confident in this decision, is big. But I'm going to go into this article and read you what it says. So, and I quote, Florida had more than 4,000 new COVID-19 cases on Saturday, which set a one-day record for a state that now nearly has 94,000. The state has seen a daily record high for each of the last 3 days, bringing cause for concern regarding the NBA's plan to finish the season out within a bubble-like setup at Walt Disney World campus at Lake Buena Vista, Florida. However, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has expressed confidence in the league's plan to safely return to action following the league's suspension due to COVID-19 pandemic, per Braxton Holmes and Zach Lowe of ESPN. And I quote from this article that they wrote on there, in this one, in at least one recent call with high-level team executives, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has acknowledged the spiking numbers in Florida. Multiple team sources describe the general tone of that call, including the questions asked of Silver on them, as tense. Another called Silver's tone resolute but somber. He expressed a resolve to go on, a confidence in the NBA bubble concept, while also recognizing the seriousness of the coronavirus spike, sources said. As Holmes and Lowe noted, the seriousness of the situation isn't lost on Silver. And the NBA and the league spokesman Mike Brass issued a statement to ESPN on what the league is doing in light of the increased COVID numbers. NBA spokesman Mike Bass tells ESPN that the league is closely monitoring the data in Florida and Orange County and will continue to work collaboratively with National Basketball Association, public health officials, and medical experts regarding our plan. The NBA, which has been suspended since March 11th, is scheduled to return for regular season games on July 30th. Teams will arrive in Florida a few weeks prior and play a few scrimmage games before heading back into official action. The NBA has set a 113-page rule book teams regarding COVID-19 compliance. Per Jack Mahoney of CBS Sports, the guide includes notes on testing, where players can and can't go, consequences for leaving the bubble, guidance on socializing with others, and so on. Each team will even have a designated Disney meal team, which will help design and create menus for teams to help facilitate any dietary needs. The NBA is pulling out all the stops to make this work inside the bubble, even if the state is seeing record numbers of COVID-19 cases. South Florida has seen the greatest spike, with Miami-Dade County having more than 25,000 cases per NBC South Florida. Orange County, where Disney is located, saw a positive rate increase from 15.2% to 17.9% on Thursday to Friday. Still, the NBA seems prepared, or as much as it can be, even going as far as giving the players the option to wear smart tech rings that may be able to detect COVID-19 symptoms up to 3 days before they appear. The league is scheduled to begin the remainder of its season on July 30th. Playoffs are set to begin on August 17th and run through early to mid-October, depending on what happens. And so that's that article. So obviously, as you can tell, listen, Adam Silver, like I said, is going to be under a very big watchful eye right now. Obviously, bringing the season back with everything that is going on, having to convince people that what's going to happen is going to be crucial and important for people moving forward, and that they can get through and be able to successfully have the season and limit the amount of cases. Because I've always said, with most of these sports leagues now that come back, I feel like every sports league and every commissioner and every owner and everybody knows there's no way you can 100% stop it from one person within the entire season getting it. But what you can try to do as best you can is control it. And I think that's what Adam Silver is trying to do. He's just trying to make sure he can control that potential. He can control the possibility of potentially getting, or most of his players getting COVID, because he's trying to protect the players so the players aren't getting sick. And then whenever they decide to allow them to bring their families and their families aren't getting sick, and then it just becomes a whole just anomaly, and then it just makes everything bad, and just everybody's going to be scrutinizing and criticizing Adam Silver. But he also has to show the leadership and listen, we've already made this commitment. We're going to go through with it. And that's how it's going to go. That's just how it's going to go. And if you don't like it, and if you have a problem with it, then, you don't have to participate, or you don't have to be a part of it. Like he said in his interview, it's going to take a sacrifice, basically, to do this. It's not going to be something that's going to be beneficial or parental for anybody. And so I feel like he's still done a great job handling the situation as best he can. But now we're going to get into the NBA transaction window, as they've set it to restart and open on June 23rd is when the transaction window for the NBA season restart will open. Obviously, if you don't forgot, NBA teams can now fill out their roster, and they will be allowed to sign free agents or two-way players, or convert two-way or 10-day contracts they've already had into a standard deal starting on that date. It'll be from June 23rd at noon all the way through June 30th at 11:59. So obviously that all puts you we're in that position of where you can go. And obviously, like Tim Reynolds said in a tweet, and the NBA will, as you expect, allow the 22 teams to replace players who opt out of playing at Disney or as otherwise excused on a limited basis. It looks like the rosters will be locked when the seeding games end on August 14th. So obviously that's going to be a big deal, because obviously that's one of the biggest things that the people talked about when talking about this transaction window what about players who don't want to come? And the NBA went ahead, did the due diligence and said, hey, if you don't want to come, as a team, you are allowed to replace this player if he is not comfortable with the situation with somebody else that you feel comfortable with. And I think that that's very smart, I think, again, of the NBA to go ahead, not restrict their players or restrict the teams and be punished for players not wanting to come back. Because listen, if they don't feel comfortable doing it, somebody's going to. Somebody's going to be like, I'll take the opportunity. This obviously could open up opportunities for G League players. This could open up opportunities for players who may have not had that much playing time throughout the season to all have an opportunity to now play. And if they play good minutes and they play well, maybe could open up the opportunity for them to potentially get eyes on them. And now if, let's say, the team lets them go, well, he played well for this team in the playoffs or in the regular season and those final 8 games. And, you know, he looks like he has potential to be a real legitimate player. So let's bring him into our organization. So, but also, Reynolds added, if a player tests positive for coronavirus during the playoffs, teams have been told that he can be replaced by a substitute player who has 3 or fewer years of service. So obviously, it's interesting that they're saying that basically they have to be a young player to be replaced. I think they understand there's no point bringing in a 32-year-old to come off and say, hey, yeah, can you come play for us? They're saying you got to bring in somebody young. And also, Mark Stein reported, in terms of the rules in terms of who players and teams can sign, they have to either have held an NBA or a G League contract or were not under any other contract for any professional team outside the United States. So Jeremy Lin, he couldn't come back because he signed a deal with China. So he couldn't come back. If he stayed a free agent, he could have came back. Or like obviously players, again, who have been in the G League, maybe on the two-way deals, who have been called up and called down, they can stay, they can come back. So obviously that's going to be big. So a couple of free agents that are eligible to sign basically are Jamal Crawford, J.R. Smith, Nick Young, and DeMarcus Cousins. But Greg Monroe, who also spent the season in Germany, isn't eligible because he played in Germany, if you see the example that Mark Stein gives on his tweets. Obviously, don't forget player rosters can now carry up to 17 as well. And now the fact that they have a lot of flexibility just in case a player gets injured or a player gets COVID gives them a lot of flexibility as a team to be like, okay, we can replace him, we can go here with it, and make things happen. So that's going to be big, and I think that's going to be big for everybody coming soon and coming up. So that's going to be good for them. And then lastly, the NBA sets a new date for the draft and an early entry deadline. And I'm going to read this article off Bleacher Report. The 2020 draft is reportedly scheduled for October 16th, with the early entry deadline of August 17th. Wojnarowski, or Woj, added that the early entry withdrawal deadline is October 6th, which means players can wait 10 days before the draft to withdraw or return to school. The draft was originally scheduled to be held in June, but with the coronavirus pandemic halting play in March, the 2019-2020 season has yet to conclude. The NBAPA has approved the NBA's plan to resume the season played in Orlando, Florida on July 30th, with each of the 22 invited teams playing 8 regular season games before the start of the playoffs. Under that scenario, NBA finals are scheduled to end in October, which coincides with the reported new draft date. The NBA draft lottery is now scheduled for August 25th. And while the combine has yet to be rescheduled, it may not happen because of COVID-19. If the NBA 2020 draft does indeed happen on October 16th, it may not give draftees much time to get acclimated with their new teams prior to the start of the 2020-2021 season. Obviously, we remember that the NBA has discussed a deal starting the season December 1st, even though the Basketball Players Association has said it's unlikely it will start that early. Of 30 teams, 8 of them will not report to Orlando to play should the season resume. Those 8 teams currently have the best chance to land the number 1 overall draft pick, with Golden State, Cavaliers, and Minnesota leading at 14% apiece. There is no evidence and clear choice to go overall at this juncture, but there is no shortage of intriguing and talented options like Australian League guard LaMelo Ball, University of Georgia guard Anthony Edwards, University of Memphis big man James Wiseman stand out as the top 3 candidates, and etc. So there you go right there. That's the new draft date, October 16th, if you're into the draft. it's just how it's looking. That's just how it's looking. So we're going to have to see what happens. Obviously, like I said, this COVID-19 and the rush of having to get through the season, then getting to the next season is going to maybe affect a lot of people and what can happen trying to go into the next season with young players as well, not getting enough time to acclimate or train with their season. So don't be surprised if rookies get off to a slow start next year, having such a long layoff in basketball and not getting enough time to work with their teams and potential, just trainers and everything when getting ready for the next season. But coming up next, we're going to talk more about the top free agent options from the new transaction period. Players have concerns about leaving the bubble, and the NBA is now going to allow up to 10 coaches to enter facilities on Tuesday. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed Adam Silver being confident in the NBA's plan to restart, sticking to its guns in the call with many top NBA execs from teams saying, listen, we're going to do this. I'm confident what we're doing. We're going to do everything we can. We're going to do the best we can, and that's just going how it has to go. Adam Silver holding his ground and letting people know what the deal is. Also, the NBA sets a new transaction window as it opens June 23rd at noon. June 23rd at noon. June 23rd at noon. So that's when you will see your players start to sign players to fill out their rosters going into the regular season and potentially the playoffs as well. And lastly, a new date has been set for the NBA draft. October 16th is the new date, followed by free agency the 17th, and 18th is the new free agency period. So that's everything that's happening right there from last segment. Now we're going to get into this segment, and we're going to get into the top free agent options during the new transaction season. This list of players will be brought to you by Brice Report. I obviously use them a lot for a lot of things. So we're going to talk. I'm going to talk about some of the players they have on this list, and we'll go from there. And we'll see how we have time to get to other stories I have, or we'll just push that into the next segment or anything after that. So obviously, unprecedented NBA times calls for unprecedented NBA transaction window, which is obviously never been something we've ever heard before. So obviously the NBA is now giving the teams the ability to increase their depth and replace players that may not want to come to Orlando with players who are still available and ready to play. And so obviously we're going to discuss from the G League some honorable mentions that Bleacher Report has and their top 5 free agents that they think you should go after and try to sign from this period. So obviously we'll get into all of that, and we'll see the potential that is available for all of these players. So from the G League, some of the top performers that people feel like should or could make something happen. Jalen Adams, former Atlanta Hawks point guard. He plays for the Wisconsin Herd. He's averaged 21 points, 5.7 assists, and shoots 40% from range in the G League this year. Even though he was cut by the Hawks this offseason and was in training camp with the Milwaukee Bucks this past season. So obviously he's a guy that I think if you're looking for adding some depth at point guard, Jalen Adams will definitely be a guy that I think teams will look into getting into a deal and trying to bring in to finish out at that depth at the end of the point guard position. Another guy, a guy who's actually been known to the NBA community, he's been around for a minute, has been up and down since 2013. Isaiah Cannon plays for the Stockton Kings, another point guard. Obviously, he's a score-first guy, 6-foot guy, averaged 21 points this year, 6.1 assists, and 3.7 threes across 30 contests, while hitting 41% from 3 on his looks. He's also a guy that teams can bring in for point guard depth. He's a guy who you see sometimes playing, you see sometimes in the G League. I remember him mainly on the Phoenix Suns, when the Phoenix Suns really didn't have a point guard. He played decent for him. He didn't play bad. But obviously, he's still around. He's still been up and down, like I said, in the league. Brice Commode from the Delaware Bluecoats is a center, undrafted from Florida State this past summer. He made his great first impression as a professional baller as he's 7'4", and he was the G League defensive player of the year. So he's someone you definitely can bring in for defensive depth. Somebody who clearly, listen, this man is going to get you boards and he's going to get you blocks. Obviously, guys this tall, the biggest issue you sometimes have is stamina, conditioning. Can he run the floor? Because obviously players like him can sometimes slow down the pace because it takes him a while to get down the floor. But defensively, he had 10 rebounds this year. He only had basically averaged 11 rebounds, and he averaged 4 blocks. And he also got 11 points on top of that. So definitely, if you're looking for some defensive help, he's the guy definitely teams will look into trying to sign out of the G League to add to the defensive front court. Another guard, Josh Maggie from the Lakeland Magic. The 30-year-old held a two-way pact in a 10-day contract for Orlando Magic this season, and he also played for Atlanta in 2017-2018. He's more of a passing guy. He's a pass-first guy, averaged 10.6 assists, which was the G League best this year in all of the G League. He also was good from deep this year on 42% from three. So obviously he could be a little bit of a 3-and-D guy, but also someone I like to call someone that can just run the offense after he learns it a little bit, just runs the offense effectively, does what he needs to do, and just tries to play his game. So that's going to be the big thing, I think, there, that if someone wants more of a more veteran player to get out of the G League, he'll be a guy definitely I think teams will look into trying to get. Another guy, Jared Uoff from the Memphis Hustle. He's a small-size power forward, 6'9" swingman. He had a cup of coffee with the Memphis Grizzlies this season, which means he played a couple of games. And he also was with the Dallas Mavericks in 2016-2017. His G League production this year was 18.9 points, so 19 points a game, 11 rebounds, 3 assists, and 1 block a game with a 49, 36, and 79 shooting slash. So obviously he's a guy, again, can maybe make a guy who's a 3-and-D kind of guy, it looks like. He'll be a 3-and-D player, someone who can kind of do it all, someone who's probably going to be good effort, energy off the bench, again, depth if you have foul trouble at the position, someone obviously who could put at small or 3 or 4, so just in case you have foul trouble, you need somebody to come in, he could go and play that position for you, a guy definitely who's going to get some very good and hard looks, I think, this season, and when the season transition window opens up. And those are all the G League options that they have suggested on here, and my thoughts on those players. Now we're going to get into the honorable mentions, players that they think should be definitely, picked up and definitely need to be talking about getting picked up to your favorite team that's coming back. Obviously, first player they have is Trey Burke. Obviously, Trey Burke, we remember how he was at Michigan, leading Michigan to that national championship. Obviously, he shot 34% career from three, and he's been a 5.5 assist guy on distributing. He offers some shot creation, and also he can perk up his scoring starved squads if, because Trey Burke, one thing about him, he can get some points off the bench. So, obviously, and really Trey Burke, for the most part, has been on NBA teams a lot throughout his career. He's just been a guy who's just been around the league. But he can play when he gets minutes. So, definitely a guy, again, point guard, maybe play some 2-guard for you, some combo, can give you some production offensively, give you a bit of a burst, give you a threat on the floor from 3, and do what he has to do. Obviously, another guy that people have been talking about all year, Jamal Crawford. The last time we saw him, he was putting up 51 points on Dallas Mavericks in Davinsky's home final. But obviously, that was on the Phoenix Suns that were a lottery pick. Obviously, Crawford is a guy who's always been, I'm sure Jamal Crawford could go out and score today. Scoring is not the problem. It's just Jamal Crawford is an older guy. He is age 40. Some teams may have a concern. He's an old guy. Can we trust him? Can he play defense? Is he going to be able to hold up? Vince Carter can hold up. I don't see why Jamal Crawford can hold him. And then on top of that, Jamal Crawford could probably drop more buckets than Vince Carter can at this point. Jamal Crawford says he's been training to be ready. And so, listen, I think, obviously, he's a guy who you could play in sporadic bursts because of his instant offense, but you don't want to play him too long. And I think that's what I think teams have to consider when trying to bring in Jamal Crawford. Obviously, a big scoring punch off the bench if you do bring him in. Tyler Johnson, another guy. Obviously, if you remember what happened, he has $50 million contract. He didn't have the game back up. The Miami Heat salary dumped him during the third season of that 4-year deal, and the Suns waived him in February. A willing defender and bouncy athlete. He hasn't really seen much play since then, but, it's something that definitely, comes into play. A guy who definitely could still play, give you some good on-ball defense, and, just like I said, provide depth. Again, he's more of if he would play more of an energizer guy who just give you some energy off the bench. And obviously, I think you need those types of guys sometimes if you need something different, if the lineup's not working, if something just isn't working, you need a guy who can come in there and really just give you that boost sometimes that are off the bench. J.R. Smith also is a guy who's also on this list. Obviously, J.R. Smith has been, like I said, been rumored to maybe sign with a team this year. There's been reports that teams have been maybe interested in him this year. I fully expect him to get signed during this period because he's a 3-and-D guy who I'll give you postseason experience, good 3-point shooter, and decent perimeter defense with some shot creation. Obviously, again, he's one of those guys I would play in spurts because if you play him in long-term minutes, he's not the most consistent guy. And obviously, J.R. Smith sometimes, you don't know what J.R. Smith you're getting. You don't know if you're getting hot J.R. Smith or you're getting cold J.R. Smith. So you want to kind of be careful with a guy like that and not really, put yourself in that position. Now, the top 5 players that Bleacher Report actually says will be the top targets. Now, number 5 will be Allen Crabbe. He is a specialist, but is a one-trick skill set. And that's perimeter shooting. Crabbe is a shooter. Again, 3-and-D guy. Probably one of the best unsigned 3-point shooters that are still out there. And definitely someone who can play well. So, he's a guy, remember, he signed that big contract with the Brooklyn Nets, which the Portland Trailblazers matched, but he could never elevate his game. But he's still a good 3-point shooter, and you can never have too many 3-point shooters on your team. Definitely a guy I think teams will definitely look very heavily into and try to get to. Isaiah Thomas at number 4. Obviously, Isaiah Thomas is a guy who, was hurt. Now he's healthy. Obviously, Isaiah Thomas, his deal. He can score. He can give you 20, 18. He can give you some buckets. His problem is his size. So he can be a defensive liability, especially in the playoffs where teams start to actually attack your weaknesses more often. Obviously, if he's on the floor, that will, definitely affect him. But I think a team should still give out a waiver on him. He's still a veteran guard who can come in and give you buckets off the bench. Obviously, if he can stay healthy, that's going to help him too. He hasn't been healthy also recently, so that's going to be very important for him to make sure he can get his health back up and going. Number 3, Iman Shumpert. Obviously, Iman Shumpert is a guy who, perimeter defender, and can shoot the 3 ball a little bit. Guy who plays with a lot of energy, can guard multiple positions. I mean, there's a reason why he's also been one of the players who, he sticks around the league. He sticks around, he's still around, still produces, still goes out there and plays his game. Because he's a guy who can kind of do it a lot. He can kind of do it all, in a way. Iman Shumpert is a guy who can really help any team. And listen, he's probably, like I said, a guy that you want to bring in as a defensive guy who can occasionally hit the 3 ball, to me. That's what I think Iman Shumpert basically is at this point. And I think that will be what his best suited role will be moving forward. And number 2, Gerald Green. Obviously, Gerald Green, 34 years old. He has a high volume 3-point shooting, and he's also great in the transition. But obviously, he broke his foot in mid-October, which changed everything for him, so he never suited up, and he was also cut. So he's never really had a chance to get back on the court, but he should be healthy now. I definitely think teams will definitely want to bring him in. Obviously, they're going to see about his health and make sure he's good to go, but I think he's a guy definitely a team should definitely try to get and bring in because of the production he could bring. Like I said, he's great in fast break and transition, so if you're looking for more of a fast-paced type of offense and a 3-point shooter, Gerald Green definitely fits that description completely. A guy who really, he made plays for the Houston Rockets. He obviously in Mike D'Antoni's system, it worked perfectly for his skill set. So whoever brings him in definitely needs to understand his skill set and use him in the best way they know how so he can be the most productive for them. And the top player on this list is DeMarcus Cousins, obviously, because DeMarcus Cousins has always been a guy that we feel like has the ability to be a great offensive contributor. And obviously, they think DeMarcus Cousins is healthy. Obviously, he had that torn Achilles before the season started that really messed him up. The Lakers waived him to sign Markieff Morris. And I think it was actually Marcus Morris. But they've always said, would they bring him back? He's a guy that I think is healthy now and definitely could play. Obviously, he's had a lot of injuries. But if he can stay healthy, he has a size, skill to be an 11, 10, 6 guy. He could do a little. Listen, it's really less bringing him on board since basically everything is an emergency option at this point. So the best thing you should probably do at this point is just kick the tires on it, see what happens, and hope for the best. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. So that's pretty much how that's going there with that. And those are the players that our Bleacher Report is listed as guys that you definitely need to look into bringing in to your team to add depth to your roster. But coming up next, players have concerns about the COVID-19 concerns. I'll talk about that story. I'll also talk about other stories that are happening around the league in the NBA. For all that here and more, stay tuned to the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down all the potential players that teams should look at to bring in during the NBA's transaction period. We discussed G League players. We discussed 5 from there. We discussed honorable mentions, players that I still think will probably be looked at very heavily / signed. And also Bleacher Report's top 5 players that should potentially be signed to a team during the transaction period, as teams have the ability to sign players and replace players just in case of COVID injury or not wanting to go to Orlando during all the things that are happening. Also, rosters are extended to 17, so obviously that can give you more depth, and obviously they really want to replace a lot of these guys with younger guys to give them a chance to still be able to play and get experience, so obviously that's a big thing for the NBA moving forward. And we'll have to see how all that works out and how that goes when it cuts down to it at the end of the day. But right now we're going to get back into it. So there's a report that the NBA players have COVID-19 test concerns for Disney staff leaving the bubble. This is an interesting article. The NBA will have a bubble in place when the 2019-2020 season, which has been suspended since March 11th due to the COVID-19 pandemic, returns, with 22 teams finishing the campaign out at Walt Disney World, Florida in July. However, not everyone in the bubble is subject to the same rules, and Disney staffers are able to work and leave without being subject to testing. That brought up concerns in a National Basketball Players Association virtual meeting, which Baxter Holmes and Zach Lowe of ESPN relayed. The National Basketball Players Association had a virtual town hall with players this week and addressed concerns about Florida cases. Multiple sources familiar with the matter tell ESPN players brought up the fact that Walt Disney staffers who will not reside in the NBA campus, including hotel house cleaning, will not be subject to any coronavirus testing, sources said. One mitigating factor that was added, many of the surging cases are in the areas other than Orlando. Players who leave the NBA's Walt Disney World will be subject to a 10 to 14-day quarantine upon their return. creating a situation where they will have to remain in the bubble or risk missing multiple games. The COVID-19 numbers in Florida have seen a massive rise in June. Per the state's official data and surveillance board, 603 cases were confirmed on June 1st. That number topped 4,000 on Friday, marking the third consecutive high day in which the state saw a record high in one day. Naturally, that creates some concerns for the players. NBPA Exec Director Michelle Roberts made the following statement to ESPN when asked about Florida's rising COVID-19 figures. And I quote, "Can't say I'm surprised. Given the state's approach to reopening, we are obviously clearly monitoring the situation. While we take some solace in knowing our players will not travel commercially to get to Orlando, that access to the campus is severely limited, and of course, all of the other health and safety protocols in place. The NBA will keep our attention, if necessary, to add further restrictions respecting those third parties having access to the campus, and we will seek to implement them." Baxter and Lowe clarified Roberts' remarks on the third parties, noting that she meant Disney staffers who will be servicing the hotels where teams are staying or providing other services on the campus. It's unclear what restrictions could be imposed on Disney staffers since they are unionized, per Roberts, and that thought was echoed by some NBA execs. Teams are scheduled to arrive at Walt Disney World from July 7th to 9th, per Lowe and Holmes. 22 of 30 league teams will take part in the restart, the 16 currently in the playoff picture, and the 6 others within 6 games of the postseason in the Eastern and Western conferences. So that's what the report is saying. And so obviously, I mean, this is a legitimate concern. You're right. The people that are assisting the players, helping the cutters get cuts, giving them food, they won't be subjected to the same strict testing that the players will be subjected to. So it's understandable why players may have a concern with allowing those staffers to just really move in and out of the circle with cases surging in Florida, in different parts of Florida and in that area of Florida. Because what if they get COVID-19 from one of the staffers? You know, and I think that could be a dangerous situation. So I'm sure this was a concern that the NBAPA will definitely discuss with the league. What are we going to do about everybody who is assigned to help us during that time, and the staffers who are assigned to assist us during that time? Because again, you don't want to put the players at risk where they could be potentially in trouble because of it. So clearly that's going to be something that will be continuously under a watchful eye, and hopefully we'll see, you know, what happens, you know, because like I said, this is just part of the many things that will be discussed this season, because you're always trying to make sure that you're putting the players first, and you got to make sure that's the most important thing for everybody. So, you know, we'll have to see how everything goes. We'll have to see how everything is, and we'll have to see what the NBA and NBAPA actually officially agree on, the restrictions and rules and everything like that, because I'm sure we'll hear an update when they do come to a decision when it comes to that. But also, the NBA will also start to allow coaches, up to 10 coaches from every coaching staff, at facilities starting Tuesday, today when this podcast drops. The NBA will allow as many 10 coaches in the facilities, okay? So now teams can have 4 players at the facilities from June 30th and 8 players from July 1st to 9th. And then teams will then head to Walt Disney World to finish the season. Obviously, the NBA basically reopened practice facilities May 8th, obviously provided by what your local government was saying in that respective state. But obviously they told coaches to kind of stay away. They've been very strict with rules and facility rules. You know, obviously not wanting coaches, assistant coaches to be really taking part in the workouts that players maybe decide to do at these facilities. The NBA is doing everything they can to not leave any stone unturned, in my opinion, with everything that's going on, with the safety protocols. Obviously, remember, they sent us 113-page protocol that includes rules on table tennis, and they said no doubles and snorkeling. So clearly they were very, detailed with what they're trying to do. And they're also trying to create a COVID-19 hotline for people to report violations if they do see them in Florida. So you can see the NBA is very serious about this, and they're doing everything they can possible to make sure they protect everything and don't leave anything unturned so then someone could get infected with the coronavirus, which is what they should do. And that's smart on their end. That is very smart on their end. Also, Mark Cuban made a statement in the news. So obviously one of the big things with the NBA coming back is there will be no fans, right? There's not going to be any fans. So one thing they've been talking about is how can we replicate crowd noise during these empty arena games? So it's not just basketball. So obviously I reported a few weeks ago that they were thinking about maybe getting 2K crowd noise. Well, Mark Cuban thinks that they should allow NBA fans to use a certain app to then make noise. Now, obviously, if you've been paying attention to boxing recently, that's been on ESPN, they have allowed for an app to be used where you can cheer on the app to create noise. And I think that's something Mark Cuban is basically saying. He thinks we should use an app that will allow fans to make noise and be heard on TV to help replicate crowd noise. Obviously, this will help make them very interactive with what's going on, but it's also something they can experiment with and see what happens. So, because obviously, again, one of the biggest challenges for people hosting these games, ESPN, ABC, is the presentation. How can you make the game presentation interesting with no audience, with no crowd, with no people in the stands? And obviously, they're trying to do what they can to make sure that happens. So, we'll have to see. You know, if that's something that they'll actually do. So I think we'll have to see maybe if the NBA decides to go in that direction. And just a quick, update. I don't know if I told you guys this. I'm going to tell you guys the NBA team Disney hotels based on seating. So I'm just going to basically tell you all the hotels that these teams will be staying at. At the Grand Desto, it will be the Bucks, Lakers, Raptors, Clippers, Celtics, Nuggets, Jazz, and Heat for the top seeds. The Grand Floridian will be Thunder, 76ers, Rockets, Pacers, Mavericks, Nets, Grizzlies, and Magics. And the Yacht Club will be Blazers, Kings, Pelicans, Spurs, and Suns, and Wizards. Just in case y'all wanted to know where your favorite team was going to go when the season started, what hotel they're going to be at. In other news, Klay Thompson is now healthy in training without restrictions after ACL injury. Now, Golden State season may be over, but Klay Thompson at least is healthy and ready to go for next season. Per The Athletic's Anthony Slater, Thompson has been training without restriction after final medical clearance a couple of weeks back. Because obviously Thompson went through a high-octane workout on last Thursday. Obviously, we remember what happened to Tristan Thompson. I mean, not Tristan Thompson. Oh, my God. Not Big Trist, but Klay Thompson. And it's Game 6 where he went up for a dunk. He tore his ACL. And so, obviously, Golden State made the conscious decision to go ahead and sit him out the entire year and rest him up. And obviously, with everything going on, he'll get plenty of rest and get plenty of time to train. He will definitely be ready to go. Because obviously, right now, Slater is still saying that Thompson still has to meet plenty of notes in terms of conditioning checkpoints, in terms of him being able to play, but he's definitely on path and on reach to do that. So everything's looking good from that perspective with Mr. Klay Thompson. And then one last more story here from the Real GM. So obviously I told you about those rings that players are going to have and what those rings could potentially track and what the bands could track in terms of all this medical information and body information they have on the players. Well, in the Real GM, they wanted to go ahead and say, or made an article and said, teams will not have access to player and staff data from optional activity tracking device. Because obviously that was one thing that some people wondered about in terms of privacy. You're having rings that's tracking them. Who will have access to this information? And in a very short article, they said, players and staff who want to wear Oura rings will receive them upon entering the Disney World bubble, sources told Tim Bontemps of ESPN. Wearing this device is optional. It's not required. It's optional, people. So they don't have to wear it if they don't want to wear it. The data will be shared to NBA and NBAPA for health monitoring purposes. The actual teams of these players will not have access to the data, but will be notified if a player shows symptoms or is at high risk for the virus. So that's what they're saying when it comes to those rings. So obviously, I guess that can make people feel better. Obviously, if they're worried, they're going to give my information out. Everybody's going to know what's going on with my body. I don't like all this information being shared. Well, they're saying, listen, your team won't have it, so you won't have to worry about that. And so you'll be in good shape and ready to go moving forward. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I think everything will work out from there. So we'll just have to see what happens. And it'll be interesting to see if players be walking around with it, to me. So we'll really have to see what happens. But coming up next, Brian Windhorst says the season is too big to fail. We'll go and break that down next. We're also going to talk about other NBA news and topics around the association as we're wrapping this show up in our final segment coming up next right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down more NBA topics and news right here on the podcast. We talked about players having concerns in terms of staff of Disney World leaving in and inside from out and in the bubble. And they discussed it with the NFLPA on a conference call, and they discussed that and trying to implement changes. Also, the NBA will now allow up to 10 coaches in the facilities with the players as we're getting closer to restart time in the NBA. Mark Cuban says that they should entertain using an app to create fan noise to help the presentation of the games and to let the fans still be interactive as they can use it experimentally during the regular season games and see if they want to continue it going into the playoffs. Also, Klay Thompson has been fully cleared and ready to go with no medical restrictions. Obviously, it's just now about getting his conditioning and everything back up to order. It looks like Klay Thompson will definitely be back for next season. And we also lastly talked about the NBA not allowing the information that if players decide to wear the rings and bands, it will not be shared with teams. So teams won't know the information, only the NFL, NBA, and the NBPA. So there you go right there. That's all we talked about last segment. Now we're going to get into what we're going to talk about this segment. So, Brian Windhorst says the NBA season is too big to fail, and it will happen. It's going to happen. Article. Right here, I'm reading right here to you guys. While there may be a contingent of players who are pushing back on the NBA's return next month, ESPN's Brian Windhorst said Sunday on SportsCenter, the overwhelming majority of guys are ready to play. And I quote, as this is an excerpt from that interview, "This, from what everybody I talk to right now, is too big to fail. The overwhelming majority of players are excited. They want to be there. They know that they're going to be positive tests as they start entering the bowl with teams in the next few days. Can I say that's going to be the case next Sunday when we talk? No, I cannot. But right now, this is too big to fail. From what I understand, it is going to happen. Despite all these changes, despite legitimate concerns, particularly concerns about people who will be in the bubble, who are not under the quarantine, it's going to happen. They are on the verge of coming to an agreement that could be announced in the next 48 hours, certainly before training camps reopen in the middle of this week." And they all admit their concerns, but they all admit this is the best that they can do. And they are steeling themselves for the wave of potential positive tests back that are going to come in the next few days, explaining it in that we want to find out who's sick so we can get them healthy so we can establish the bubble again. That is the rhetoric. That may look silly in a few days, or it may be reality, but we are headed towards at least a restart of training camp with an agreement from the union very soon. Players are slated to return to their respective markets this week, so any team that is currently not at their respective city where their NBA team resides will be expected to return to that city this week, where they will undergo COVID-19 testing in preparation for the middle of training camp. Teams will have a short camp in their market before traveling to Orlando on July 7th to prepare for the resumption of the 2019-2020 season, currently scheduled for July 31st. Uncertainty regarding the NBA's return has increased in the recent weeks. Obviously, as I've told you multiple times on the show, Kyrie and just players coming together, being concerned about a lot of things like social injustice, imagery, is it taking away from what's going on in the world, etc. Due in part to the concerns over safety and players do not want to distract from social justice issues, Kyrie Irving and Dwight Howard have been among the most outspoken players cautioning against the return, with Irving leading the conference call earlier this month to express his doubts. "I don't support going into Orlando," Irving said on the call, per Shams Cardina of The Athletic and Stadium. "I'm not with the systematic racism and the BS. Something smells fishy. Whether we want to admit it or not, we are targeted as black men every day we wake up." Florida's recent spike in COVID cases has led to deepening concerns by both players and league execs. A team executive described NBA Commissioner Adam Silver as resolute but somber in desire to move forward with the bubble plan. Florida has become one of the nation's hot spots for COVID-19, reporting a single high case of 4,449 new cases Saturday. Florida is one of the 22 states where cases are increasing. And so that's what we got there from Brian Windhorst and other people. And listen, I've even watched it. I've heard it. It does seem like the season will not fail in terms of coming back. It seems like this ship is going and it's going to go. And if you're going to get on it, then you get on it. If you don't, then you don't. And you won't be penalized for that. Like, 'cause that's one thing I want to really make sure people understand. They're not being forced to go to this. They just have the option to go. There's a difference. There's a difference. It's not, oh, you have to show up. You have to be there. You have to be a part of it. That's not what they're saying. They're saying you have the option to be a part. You have the option to be there. You have the option to show up. That's a big difference. And so, listen, rosters may look very different when they start back. But I believe it when they say that the majority of players want to play, because I truly believe the majority of players want to play. They understand what's going on, but they have a job to do, and they want to play. And obviously, I think also players realize the CBA complications and everything that could come out of not playing as well. So I think they're going to do what they feel like is best for them, and they'll take their chances with what's going to happen. Because literally, next season could roll around, and COVID's still around, and we're still going to have to do this anyway. So we might as well see if we can get through it now, see how it goes. If things go well, people don't think of things. If NBA handles this very well and the restrictions and everything happens and it works, when the season comes back around in December, it will give the players, it will give the cities, it will give the league more confidence that if we create another plan for the next season, we successfully did it with the bubble, so we can successfully do it again. Because obviously, I'm sure they're not going to do another bubble for the next season. They're going to obviously have to be more extensive, but I'm sure they're going to do what they have to do to make it work. And so, if things can work out, you might see players be more trustful of what's going on and say, okay, well, they did a good job. I trust you. Let's do this. And I think that's what's probably going to end up happening here. So we're going to all have to see how it all ends up and how it all works out at the end of the day. But now we're going to get into this next article. And a rumor that player guest policies at Walt Disney World related to team roster size. We're going to read this article off of Yahoo. And so, in this article, it says that, actually, this is from LakerNations.com, my bad. They have the same colors, you know. But in this article, it says that one of the issues that has been most important to NBA players with regard to return to play plan at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, was if and when family members and guests would be permitted to enter the bubble. For the two teams to the NBA Finals, who make it to the NBA Finals, they will spend over 3 months at Disney World, and not being able to have guests may have been a deal breaker. The NBA relayed that it wouldn't be the case, and since gone into detail about what the guest and policy would entail. And while nothing was concrete, it was reported around 3 guests per person would be the limit, with some exceptions. Now the NBA has provided a set of guidelines for guests when they are invited to Orlando. There are 4 main policies that will be enforced, with one main one being that teams will get 1 hotel room per player they bring that can be used for guests. And here are the main policies. I'm about to read them to you. Each team that advances past the first round of the playoffs will be permitted to reserve up to 17 if the team brings 17 players, and down to 15 if it brings only 15 players. Guest rooms for the guests of the players on the NBA campus. Second, players are responsible for the cost of each hotel room used for the player guests. The cost of meals and testing for player guests will not be charged to the players. Third, all player guests must undergo 3 days of self-quarantine and testing either in a house or hotel or in the team's home market or in Orlando outside of the NBA campus. And lastly, the NBA guests who leave the NBA campus will not be permitted to return. Using the tentative schedule that the NBA has provided, it appears guests will be able to join at the end of August when the second round of the playoffs begin. The 8 teams that make it will far have 1 player per player to make immediate family members. This still means that some players will go nearly 2 months without their families. teams will be arriving in Orlando from July 7th to 9th, but will not see their families for another 6 weeks. In addition, the rules are more strict for guests than players, as they will undergo 3 days of quarantine and will not be allowed to return if they leave. While this isn't the perfect situation, it does prevent overcrowding within the bubble and still allows for families to join for those who make it far enough in the playoffs. And cap. So, as you can tell, that's obviously a big news source there. And they're looking at what's going on and everything. And I think, again, NBA is just trying to be smart about what they do here. They're not trying to do anything risky. Obviously, I understand why they're putting the restrictions on the guests, because they want to make sure, hey, if we bring you in, you're not going to contaminate or hurt the players or other guests, potentially. Because obviously, like I said, they're trying to leave no stone unturned. And I think the NBA is doing what they feel like they need to do to create that transparency and to make sure that they control the problem. And if there is a problem, they can handle it and get on top of it as soon as they possibly can. And our last story before we go, Victor Oladipo evaluating the quad injury before deciding on the NBA restart. The readiness of Victor Oladipo's surgically repaired quad will determine whether the Indiana Pacers star participates in the NBA's planned restart in Orlando, Florida, according to Adrian Wojnarowski. Oladipo reported to the court in July, a little over a full year after suffering a right quad tendon. Wojnarowski reported that the two-time All-Star plans to ramp up activity with his team over the next week before making a decision about his availability. I feel a whole lot better, said Oladipo. I know there's risk going into it with a unique situation that I'm in. Being off so long and trying to wrap that up that fast, I've got to be smart, that's all. Prior to the suspension of the season because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Oladipo had averaged 13 points, 3 assists across 13 appearances. He was clearly working off some rust, shooting 39.1% from the field and 30% from three-point range. So obviously, Oladipo has to consider, does he feel like he's good enough to go? Does he feel like he's good enough to play? Does he feel like he's good enough to get it going? Because obviously he wants to make sure I'm not going to hold my team down if I decide to come back. So obviously I'm sure if Victor Oladipo feels confident in himself and feels like he can get back to full strength and beat the Victor Oladipo we knew, then he'll probably end up going and helping the Indiana Pacers. A lot of people don't expect him to go that far in the playoffs, but I'm sure they're going to work and play hard as they always play and play scrappy as a team as they always are. But that's all we have for you today on the podcast. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I am your host, Brice. Don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts on the GSMC Podcast Network. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review. Don't forget to leave comments. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to follow us also on our social media. And listen, like I said, I know it's crazy out there. Wherever you are, just stay safe, wear a mask, and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.